Well, we have a really wide scope. We are concerned with impacts of the environment that affect human health. So food safety, indoor air quality, waste management, these are all issues that environmental health deals with, because anything that's a function of the environment that impacts human health, that's where our job comes in. Well, there is the public health law, which is kind of an old document, but still very robust. Recently there's been a review of the public health law to see where the gaps are and with a view to updating it. We have a litter law, we have an infectious waste law, but these are limited. You know, we don't have a whole lot of legislation that controls our activities. And then there's international guidelines and international laws like the International Health Regulation. Those are some of the laws that we work by. Okay, the major things that we do are commercial waste, which is the one, commercial and residential, which is what everybody worries about. That's your household waste, that's your restaurant and commercial business waste, construction waste. Those are the huge ones. But then they're what we call special waste. So there's hazardous materials, hazardous chemicals. There's things like biohazardous waste, infectious waste, which comes out of the hospitals. We have chemotherapy waste, which is very toxic. So that produces waste. And all these special waste need special handling. The quantities may be small, but because of their high toxicity and high risk, they need to be handled very carefully. And that's not just risk to the environment, that's also risk to workers and to waste handlers. Because sometimes we have procedures in place that protect the frontline patient, the nurse, the doctor, but then the procedures are not so clear on how waste handlers are dealing with it, how janitorial staff are dealing with these wastes. Essentially, each waste has to be categorized according to its risk and how we can treat it. For instance, our biohazardous waste, for the most part, our infectious waste from the hospital, that is incinerated. Our chemical hazardous waste is segregated. If it can't be inactivated, then we stockpile it and we have to ship it off island at great expense. So the way we work is that we separate the types of waste into their risk and also how we can dispose of them. We try not to landfill anything that will have a huge impact on the environment. So things like pharmaceutical waste is incinerated if it can be. That way we're not putting pharmaceuticals, especially antibiotics, into the environment. It's a huge issue for the Cayman Islands and for the world. WHO has identified it as a very important aspect of risk for the world. Antimicrobial resistance. We're moving towards a situation where a lot of the antibiotics that we've been using to control disease are no longer going to be useful because of antimicrobial resistance. And this is part of the One Health approach, in that we're looking at not just in humans, but also in animals, in veterinary, but also in food production, and also in food safety. So antimicrobial resistance is critical to the Cayman Islands and to the world in general. Well, we spoke to the legislation and the limited legislation. For instance, our public health law deals a lot with nuisances, which suggests that we're dealing with the problem after it's occurred. There's not a lot of preventative stuff. And the public health law review has been looking at that, addressing those gaps. We also have a lack of public awareness, both commercial and for the private citizen, as to how to dispose of these items properly. And also public education needed on how to take antibiotics, how to refuse antibiotics if they're not necessary. Medical personnel actually not prescribing antibiotics if they're not needed. Because some of our special wastes are difficult to dispose of, we have to stockpile them, and stockpiling has its own issues. Is it a safe, how are we stockpiling it? Is it a safe way to stockpile it? Is it protected from the elements? What do we do with it if we have a hurricane coming, if we have an earthquake? Because now this is a hazardous material in the environment. policies in general, we're working on them in DEH, but they are policies that are interagency requirements. How do we work with public health and the pharmaceutical industry and the pharmacists and the medical facilities in ensuring that these special wastes are not getting into the environment? Wastewater treatment is a challenge, one that we're only just beginning to look at. Antibiotics, when you take antibiotics or chemotherapy, say, this goes into the liquid waste, goes into the wastewater treatment. How is that impacting the environment? This is something that we're going to start to look at. The other thing, of course, is funding. There's always limited resources. And while we get a lot of hue and outcry if our commercial waste or our residential waste isn't picked up, our special wastes are small in quantity, but they're big in risk. So identifying funds and policies and procedures to deal with this is critical to us dealing with it effectively. So we are in the process of working with public health and the pharmacists at HSA to come up with a return pharmaceuticals program where persons can return their expired or unused drugs so that they can be disposed of properly. Part of that is also to have a public education program for people in how to use them, how to dispose of them, how to treat their hazardous waste. What are they doing with their insulin needles? Are they making sure that they're disposed of in a way that doesn't present a risk to waste handlers, for instance? We're also looking, as I said, at the review of the public health law. We're researching new ideas and new ways of treating these kinds of waste. And we're also advocating definitely for proper use of, specifically for antimicrobials, that we are not using antibiotics in food farming or overprescribing antibiotics, so that we're minimizing the amount of these stuff that get into the environment. The main issue with these special wastes is they're either harmful, they're either toxic, they're genotoxic, so they affect genetics. With the antimicrobials, if you develop resistance, especially in the wider environment, then the drugs that we had that were the first line for treating things like tuberculosis and so forth are not working anymore. It used to be that these types of resistance were found in hospitals only, or special communities like persons living with HIV. Now we're getting outbreaks of resistance organisms in normal communities with normal people, because they're out there in the environment, and that is really scary for us in terms of being able to deal with these public health challenges. Well, some of them are, I mentioned earlier, not taking antibiotics for everything. Like, antibiotics do not work for viral infections. So some people insist on having them, or doctors prescribe them for viral infections. They don't work for that. Making sure that they take their antibiotics responsibly. For farmers, making sure that they're not using feed, because there was a push a few decades back that you use antibiotics in feed because it made the animals grow faster. But then that also led to antibiotic resistance. Now, the Department of Agriculture has prohibited importation of antibiotics in their feed for, I think, a couple of decades now, but there's still small loopholes to that. So making farmers more aware and more responsible in their feeding regimes. Just making sure that you dispose of your pharmaceuticals, your expired pharmaceuticals, or the stuff that you don't use in a safe manner, in a proper manner, and not flush it down the toilet, because then it gets into the environment through the wastewater stream. So those are some of the things that the average person can do to minimize their impact in the environment. We're in the process of developing a public education, and that's in collaboration with the Public Health Department and also the pharmacists, because we're all part of this One Health process. So the One Health approach looks at human, animal, and environmental health all at the same time, and acknowledges that it's not isolated one or the other. We all interact. We're all part of the same system. So that's where the public education is coming into play. Having Joe Blow on the street understand how this interaction happens and what they can do to make themselves more safe, as well as protect the environment. We would want to stress that this is a One Health approach. It's no longer just a purview of public health or the medical fraternity or the pharmacists or Department of Environmental Health or the vets. All of us have a part to play in minimizing our threats to public health and our threats to the environment. So being aware that One Health is the way to go is really important, and that's the message I want to give. So the question is, what does waste management have to do with One Health? And it's very clear that we have to be very careful with our waste management, especially for our special waste, because it has the potential to have the impact on the environment and on public health.